activist, but what do you say to your critics?
Again, you're being an activist. I am
That's not appropriate, sir.
Who are you with? What's your name?
That's not an appropriate question for you to ask.
You're going to ask how many questions? You get 3?
You're a stupid son of a bitch.
Good morning, Liberty lovers, Liberty curious, and anyone else tuning into Friendly Fire. If you're watching live, then let me especially thank you for tuning in so early. This show is dedicated to interviewing Libertarian candidates and talking about them that are running for office, and only Libertarian candidates. As the name suggests, candidates are asked tough questions, but as a fellow Libertarian, I'm not here to make them look foolish or fail, simply raising the bar for interviewing candidates and talking about them, as well as the expectation that we have for our candidates. The Libertarian Party is the third largest political party in the United States and the only viable option to compete with the big two. Now, this morning is election day, so it would be a little bit weird to try to squeeze in one last candidate for an interview. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have anything to talk about, because I still have to finish up with my review of the candidates nationwide. If you remember, I had started going through them and I broke them up according to a map of the US. Let me go ahead and pull that map up on the screen here. So let's pull that up. There we are. So we have this map. And what I had done is I broke it up into these 4 regions, and I said, all right, let's take a look and see just kind of the numbers of the candidates that are in each area. We got the Southeast, we got West, Midwest, and then we got the Northeast. And if you remember in previous episodes, displaying a little bit of info early there. That's okay, no big deal. But if you remember earlier, I had started with the Southeastern portion of the United States there in red, and then I moved on to the Western, and then in green, and then the Midwest in yellow. And then today we will go ahead and review that final little itty bitty part up there, the Northeastern. So let me go ahead and start talking about that. So basically what I did, pardon me as I go ahead and click on some fancy buttons here. Let's go ahead and remove that so it's not quite the distraction that I had. But ultimately what I was doing is I went to lpedia.org and I grabbed a list of all the delegates that each state had in the last National Libertarian Party convention. Then what I did was I went to lp.org and I used their website to grab information regarding how many candidates were running and where they were running from. And so then I did the counts, and all I wanted to do was compare and say, what do we have for candidates, say, in Florida, and how many delegates did we have? And then I kind of determined, this ratio number, and then ordered everything so I could find the top 3 and the bottom 3 based on the ratio of delegates to candidates. So if we want to look back at some past numbers here, we'll start with the Southeastern numbers. In the Southeast, we had 334 delegates with 272 candidates that are running, and this is in 2022. Then when we look over at the West, we have 282 is the number of delegates that they had that those states sent or had allocated to them for the national convention. And then they currently have 136 candidates that are running in all of those green states at some level. So these candidates are at any level, whether it's local all the way up to federal. Then we look at the Midwest and we see that we've got 239 with delegates with 165 candidates running. And then last but not least, we have our Northeastern numbers with 198 delegates with 60 candidates. Now, I think that number might actually be a little bit inaccurate. So these numbers will actually be a little bit inaccurate because I grabbed them previously and updates had been continuously being made to the system at lp.org. So if you go to lp.org, you might find that some of these numbers are a little bit off, at least in terms of the candidate counts. Okay. But that gives us a total of 673 candidates. Now, I will say this, the 673, I was finishing things up this morning. That's how I noticed that there were some numbers that were off, because I was just reviewing the numbers for the Northeast. And I said, hey, wait a minute, some of these numbers aren't matching up. So then I realized that some updates had been made and some more candidates had been added. The way that it works over at lp.org, they have this system that tracks all of the different candidates that are running for this given year. That is updated by the individual states. So if a state is delayed for whatever reason in getting that information, then that information isn't going to be accurate for me. So as of this morning, the 673 number is in fact accurate, because I did a one last final check on the total number of candidates. And then I started taking a look, and I realized that I could identify and break them up based on who is running and on the ballot today. So some of these candidates out of the 673, their elections have already passed. Maybe there was a special election or what have you. So let's pull up that information real quick, and we'll put it down at the bottom of the screen here. So we have total LP candidates for 2022, 673. And then on today's ballot, from anywhere from local to federal, you're going to have 657. So we have 657 people that are on the ballot. At least when I say on the ballot, what I mean by that is when I go to lp.org and I look and I say this state for this office or what have you, and it shows me a list of names and it says November 8th. Now, if they did not qualify and that information was still on lp.org, then unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to identify that. So I'm going to make the assumption that everybody that's there has been properly updated by their respective states. If that is not the case, then I apologize for giving you misinformation. Please do not report me to social media, or do, what have you, whatever. So anyway, let's take a look, and we'll dive into the Northeast, the Northeastern states, and we're going to dive in and take a little bit closer look at what we've got there. So let's go ahead and pull up that information here. And let's see, where are we here? And let's see, before, right, so, and there we are. So here are the states that we've got. So we've got Maine, we've got Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, and Pennsylvania, and then of course the District of Columbia. So these are the states and territories that we're going to be looking at today. So let's pop up those numbers on here. So let me go ahead and grab those numbers really, really quickly. All right. Now I apologize. I didn't do because they were much smaller, and because I wasn't able to get all the numbers necessarily nested in. So there's a slight contrast issue that I was not able to resolve. So you'll have to kind of like take a peek when you can. For instance, New York there, it has a 43, which is hard to see, but then right next to it is a 5 in yellow. So what I did, and you can look at Pennsylvania, for example, and you can see that I have 49 and 17. And what that means is there were 49 delegates to the national convention. And then there are currently 17 people running for office in 2022. Now, these numbers in yellow, they represent all of 2022. So there is this isn't necessarily looking at just today. There might be some people that were counted in these yellows whose races have already passed, and not for the northeastern states, I don't believe, but I know at least here in Florida, we have 3 people running for Jacksonville City Council, and their races are not actually until next year. But they still do pop up on lp.org. So we're looking at these numbers, and we see that Maine has had 8 delegates, but they have 3 candidates running. Now, I want to point out the reason that I did this is because, well, I had to come up with something. Whenever you're looking at a number and you're trying to identify and just kind of say, is that a good or bad, or, kind of come up with any kind of decision on whether to evaluate that number, you have to have something to compare against. I don't have numbers. I was not able to get numbers in time from prior elections, like say a prior midterm cycle. So I just simply went with the delegate counts, and I said, all right, let's go with the delegate counts. And the reason for that is that each state, there's a mathematical formula that determines how many delegates each state is allotted for the national convention. And I don't have at my fingertips necessarily the formula for that, but what it does is it identifies based on registration with the national party. And so that calculates and determines how many delegates that each state gets. So we're kind of comparing every state, based on the same formula, based on the same ratio. Okay, so you had this many people, so that entered that were a member of the national party, so you get this many delegates. So there's a little bit of fairness there. And so I look at it and I said, okay, well, for instance, if you look at Maine and if you see that Maine has 8 people that were delegates to the national party, then that kind of reflects some level of involvement with the party. So then I would say, okay, well, now we see they have 3 candidates running. Now, is 3 necessarily good or bad? Well, that's hard to say. Okay, but we can compare at least Maine to other states, and we can kind of say, okay, well, it looks like some of these states are a little bit on the lighter side. So, for instance, it's nothing's ever going to be totally fair, but we look at, like, say, Delaware. Delaware has they had 4 delegates to the national party, and they have 2 people running for office. So that seems to be, pretty solid number there from my perspective. You got 2 people that were willing to be candidates out of which is half of the number of delegates that they were able to that they had allotted to them to send to the national party. But then you look over here at Connecticut and you see it's actually less than a half there. So you've got 12 delegates versus 5 people running for office. So I would look at it, I would say, well, maybe they need to bump those numbers up, right? How's that meme go? Like, got to get those numbers up. But then we look over here in New York, and sorry, New Yorkers, but it's looking pretty abysmal there, because we've got, and you can't see it, but it's 43. So they have 43 people that were allocated to be delegates to the national party for our convention. Yet they only have 5 people running for office anywhere from local to the federal level. So I think that New York has some work to do. Pennsylvania, also same thing. Pennsylvania has 49 or had 49 delegates, and they have 17 people that are running for some office. And then you've got states up here like Vermont, which has, I believe it's 3 and 2. I'm actually having trouble seeing my number there as well, but I believe Vermont has 3. Actually, I can take a look at this other sheet that I have here, my little cheat sheet here. So Vermont, yeah, they had 3 delegates, and then they had 2. Then they have 2 candidates. And so this is just one way that I was able to kind of come up with some manner of comparing the different states and saying, okay, I think this state is doing fairly well, and this state, they need to do some work. So for instance, you can see that Massachusetts is rolling with 20 delegates, yet they only have 2 people running. Now, of course, if anybody that's following Libertarian Party matters, they understand that Massachusetts, they have, I think they might actually have 2 parties that are there, one that's recognized, one that's not. I'm not really sure what's going on, but there were some state affiliate shakeups this year, which do impact some of these numbers. Because if your affiliate has said we're no longer affiliating with the national party, or there's a split and there's 2 different affiliates fighting to decide who is the right affiliate, well, that's going to affect these numbers. So these numbers aren't like a gold standard per se, because there's all kind of mitigating factors. There are other states where there are ballot access issues. I believe that Ohio is one of the states that's currently having a ballot access issue right now. And or was it Ohio? It was one of the other states. I think it was in the Midwest. And I believe that they lost their ballot access, and all of their candidates got kicked off the ballot. I think, if I remember correctly, I think that's this year, and I think that's in the Midwest. So, again, these numbers, you can't necessarily look at these numbers and say, yep, this is the gold standard. This is exactly what it should be. However, that doesn't mean that we can't look at it and say, all right, well, here's something for us to work with now, and then determine what we want to do, how we want to approach this later. So then what I did, after coming up with these numbers and determining just exactly what these numbers kind of look like, and again, we're going to look at that map we're going to look at the full U.S. map here. And once I figured this out, and I said, all right, the Northeastern has 60 people that are running for office. You have 165 over in the Midwest, 272 in the red there in the Southeastern, and then the West you have 136. And again, this is all from state level all the way down to local level, and this is anytime in the year 2022. So you have all these people that are running for office. So now I wanted to kind of do a further analysis on this, and I said, okay, well, of the states, for each region that I reviewed, which ones were the top three, which ones were the bottom three. So in the Northeast, which I just reviewed a few moments ago, the top three, based on this ratio of delegates to candidates, the top three are District of Columbia, Vermont, and New Hampshire. Now, some people may quibble, depends on, because I know that there are some ideological differences in some of these states with, like, say, District of Columbia, which is not really a state, and then, say, New Hampshire. But again, we're trying to put every state on the same playing field here and kind of give them a bit, an evaluation of, okay, what do you got going on in those states? And then also, I just thought it would be good to let people know, hey, we have 673 candidates this year. So when people say, the Libertarian Party, they just, they don't, they never win. They're just spoilers. They're this, they're that. Remind them, say, hey, nationwide, we had 673 people running for office in 2022. And then specifically on November 8th, we have 657 people that are going to be on the ballot. Now, what does that mean in terms of election? Well, I'm going to be trying to cover that periodically throughout the day. What I will tell you is that in quarter two, and I do want to get more up-to-date information, but in quarter two of 2021, the Libertarian Party reported that they had 241 people that were elected to office. So 241. Now, I don't know out of how many. I don't know how many people were running and which election we're talking about necessarily, whether or not they were elected that specific year, or maybe they were elected, the prior year or whatnot. But in quarter two, they reported that there were 241 elected libertarians in office. So I think that's a pretty good number. Especially if you're comparing it to, say, 600 some, then what that tells me is that a third of our candidates actually do get elected. Now, again, that's an assumption there on my part. I'm taking one number, 673, which is what I have now, and I'm comparing that with the 241 that were reported as being elected back in quarter two of 2021. Okay, so I get what I'm doing here, but what I'm trying to say is, like, if the numbers hold, if they're the same, if we see that there were some 600 people that ran for office, and out of that some 600, 241, a combined number of people who were running in partisan, nonpartisan races, if 241 were elected, then that means 1/3 of our candidates are actually elected when we run them. So that's, I don't think that's too bad, particularly for a party that's, we are a third party. We struggle with ballot access issues. We struggle with getting our candidates on the debate stage. We struggle getting our message out there. I mean, you've seen it. I've seen it. We see that there are, when media does report, sometimes they'll report and say, a third party candidate, rather than actually mentioning who the candidate's name is. Or sometimes they'll report and they'll say, the Reds got this and the Blues got this, and then they just kind of leave out, even the small percentage that the Libertarians are getting. So, I think in the face of all of that, getting a third of our candidates elected, roughly somewhere around there, I think that's pretty astonishing. Now, maybe the number's a little bit lower, and hopefully maybe it's a little higher. Maybe, maybe in this particular case, that 241 represents out of, say, 500. So then we'd have more like half of them. But whatever the case may be, this is the kind of information that I want to try to keep up on and want to try to report to you, so that when you're talking to your friends, you have these numbers at your fingertips. So now let's continue going on. What I was doing is I was saying, all right, let's see who the top states were, and the top states being, they had the highest ratio of delegates to candidates, and then who was the lowest states. So in the Southeast, the red there, we have the top states were Arkansas, Alabama, and West Virginia. And Arkansas had 9 delegates with 55 candidates. Alabama, 13 delegates with 64 candidates. And West Virginia, 6 delegates with 8 candidates. So they actually had more candidates than they had delegates. Now, I personally think that is the desired state. I think that every state should seek to have more candidates than they have delegates to the national party. And I think if we did that, I mean, think about it. That would put us, what, because you can see the numbers are higher. We have 282 versus 136 over in the West there, right? So if we have more candidates running, then we're looking at closer to probably say about 1,000 candidates or so. So I think that's the goal that we should strive for, is to have more candidates than delegates. On the other hand, Georgia, Florida, and Mississippi were at the bottom, with Georgia at 34 delegates, but only 8 candidates. I will say they had some really great candidates, though, at least of those that I was able to that I was able to keep up with. Florida had 50 delegates, but we only have 9 candidates. Mississippi had 6 delegates, but only 1 candidate. So those states there, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, we're going to have to step up our game and figure out how to get more people running for office, and not just warm bodies. We want good people. We don't want to just throw warm bodies out there. We want people that we can get behind and that can pave the way. Like, maybe they don't win this time, but they pave the way for the next time. So then let's jump over to the Midwest. So in the Midwest, our top states were Nebraska, South Dakota, and Iowa. So Nebraska had 9 delegates with 15 candidates. South Dakota had 5 delegates with 8 candidates, and then Iowa, 10 delegates with 14 candidates. So again, we're sitting here and we're seeing that these particular states had more candidates than they had delegates to the national party back in May. So, but then our bottom 3 for the Midwest would be Wisconsin, North Dakota, and Ohio. I'll get to Ohio in a second, but Wisconsin had 20 delegates to the national party, but they only had 3 candidates. So we got to do some work there. North Dakota and Ohio, they both show at 0 candidates. Now, I did not check today, so that information may be the same, but I do believe that Ohio is the state that lost ballot access and had all of their, I believe that's the state that I saw something where the state attorney general, I believe, was challenged on the previously accepted ballots or information, requirements, and then kicked all of the candidates off. So I believe that Ohio is now sitting without ballot access. So that's a bit of a challenge there. So, but still at the bottom. So I kind of had to leave them there. Again, I said earlier that there may be mitigating circumstances. So then we jump over to the West Coast, and our top states are going to be Nevada with 14 delegates and 24 candidates, Utah with 13 delegates, 18 candidates, Colorado with 35 delegates and 47 candidates. So again, we're still showing that same trend of states that have more delegates than they have candidates. Or I'm sorry, more candidates than they have delegates. And then the bottom 3 are going to be Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming with 0 candidates all the way down the board. I don't know of any ballot access issues there. So it just may be that either they have 0, they don't have any candidates, or it could be that they simply, those states weren't updating the LP website accordingly. So therefore they may have some people running that I just simply am not aware of. Unfortunately, I cannot go to every single state and look them up by the official records. So if you're one of those states and you're like, hey, I know that we've got somebody running for a governor or for, whatever position, well, you need to get on your state party and let them know to update that information accordingly. And then lastly, we're going to, the northeastern states, we said DC, Vermont, New Hampshire, those are the top 3 with 3 delegates, 2 candidates for DC. Same thing for Vermont. And then New Hampshire has 13 delegates with 7 candidates. Now, this is kind of breaking the trend a little bit. The other 3 regions actually had more candidates than they had delegates. So we can look and we can compare and say, all right, well, it looks like the Midwest, the Southeast, and the West all were doing better in the top 3 states in each one of those regions are doing better than the top 3 states over in New Hampshire, because they had more candidates than they had delegates. And then the bottom three for the Northeast are going to be Rhode Island, New York, and Massachusetts, with Rhode Island at 3 delegates and 1 candidate, New York with 43 delegates and 5 candidates, Massachusetts with 20 delegates and only 2 candidates. So those states, along with the other 9 that I mentioned moments ago, they need to step up their game and really work hard. Now, I don't know what's that going to take. I don't know. What I can tell you, at least for Florida, one of the things that Florida is doing is we have people that are actively trying to get affiliates set up. So I'm going to divulge a little bit of information here, and maybe some people will get mad at me, but that's okay because that's what I do. We have 67 counties here in Florida and only 21 affiliates. So that means we're lacking significantly, and that probably is what's contributing to that low number that we were seeing there. I don't have where do we go here? Where's Florida? Southeast Florida. So we have 50 delegates, but we only had 9 candidates. Well, part of that is probably because we don't have a proper number of affiliates. Now, ideally, we would have every single county would have an affiliate. Unfortunately, that does get challenging because some of these counties, they may be a little bit more on the rural side. And so you have fewer people, which means you're going to have fewer libertarians, and you may just simply not have the numbers to be able to create an affiliate. Because for starters, you have to have at least 3 people. You have to have a chair, a vice chair, and then a third person can actually be the treasurer and the secretary. So you have to have at least 3 people. That only gives you officers, but that doesn't really put you in a position to necessarily sprout a candidate. So you have to have more people in order to sprout candidates from an affiliate. So if we got 21 affiliates that are active, and when I say active, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're busy doing things. That just simply means that we have an affiliate that's legally recognized. You have people that are in the positions of the officer positions, and they're holding a meeting, and they're making their reports to the supervisor of elections, and they're doing all the things, the things that are required of an affiliate. They're doing the administrative things at a minimum. Okay. So we've got people that are now, one of our own candidates, Tub, he is going around and trying to help get some of these affiliates set up. We've got other members that are also trying to get some set up. I know that in the area where I live, we are considered Region 5, and we have, the 5 doesn't reflect this, but we have 5 counties that are in this particular region. And of those 5 counties, there is only one, Duval, the county that I'm in, that actually has an active affiliate. Now, I think the next one that's coming up, that will be coming up on board, will be Clay County. So we'll have 2 out of the 5, but ideally we would need to have 5. The county north of us, Nassau, it's hard to even find libertarians there. So they may struggle to get an affiliate, but that's no excuse. We need to look and say, all right, out of the 67, we only got 21. So let's figure out what these other 40, which ones have the sufficient numbers of people that we just need to get motivated to get out there. Because once they get out there, and then you start getting a more active party, one that's going to do 2 things. That's going to likely bring up our delegate counts, because the more people that are involved at the state and local level, then will increase to some degree the numbers of people that are active and involved with the national level. So that will increase our delegate counts. But then also, because you have more active people, you're going to have more incentive for people to run at some office. Because, let's be honest, if I'm in a county where there's no active affiliate, then it's going to be hard for me to want to run as a libertarian, because who do I have? I don't even have the base support. So these are the kind of things that we need to work on as a party. And I think that these numbers that I'm showing today, that I've showed in some of the past episodes, I think they go toward not only having us some information when our friends and family kind of laugh and scoff at us, but it also goes towards saying, you know what, this is how we get better. This is how we increase the number of candidates. And this is how we get more motivated people to get active. We have to start looking at numbers and saying, here's what we're doing. Here's what we could be doing. So I think that the standard, in my opinion, right now, it could change in the future, but I think the standard should be that we seek to have more candidates than we have delegates. That to me is something that seems to be easy. Of the top 12 states out of the 4 regions, 9 of them did that without any effort. So only 3 did not do that. So I think that just by looking at it as it is now, without people actually trying, that should be our goal. Now, I want to end on some more numbers here, because I'm not done with numbers, and maybe it's a little too early. I get it. It's almost 8:15 in the morning, and I'm rattling off numbers after numbers after numbers. And I apologize if you're like, DL, come on, man. Like, seriously, we haven't even had a full cup of coffee, and you're over here showing us all these numbers and counts and blah, blah, blah. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is. Maybe in the future, the show can be moved to a more appropriate time when everybody's fully awake. But for now, we got numbers. So I took a look. I was looking at the numbers this morning from the LP's website, and I was able to identify how many federal, state legislature, county, and local candidates are running. So unfortunately, I don't have the numbers set up to put them on the screen. So I do apologize for that. But right now, today, for November 8th, there are 107 people that are running for federal office throughout the United States for Libertarian Party. At the state level, so this is like governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, those kind of things, we have 103 people. So that's an average of 2 people per state. So I think that's actually pretty good there. So we have 103 libertarians running on the ballot today, running for some state level office. Then we have our state legislature. So this is like your state, your state House, your state Senate, and there might be a few others that are included in there. So we have 288 people, libertarians, that are running for state legislature offices today on the ballot throughout the United States. Then at the county level, this is like county sheriff, those kind of positions. Anything where it covers an entire county. I think a good majority of them are going to be sheriff level, but there are some other ones. You have 101. So again, we have an average of 2 per state. I think that number could be bumped up a little bit. If you think about it, I just said a moment ago that Florida has 67 counties. And so out of 67 counties, if we're averaging 2 people running at the county level, then that means for the 67 counties, there's only 2 people running to represent people at the county level. So definitely want to bump up those numbers. And then at the local level now, and this number is really low. However, I think there's a justification for it. At the local level, there are 58 people that are running for local offices. Now, I think that's a little on the low side, but it may be that a lot of the offices are not up necessarily for election today. Okay, because remember, this is for today only. I know for a fact that our 3 candidates here in Jacksonville, their election isn't until March. And so they're not included in this 58 number, but they are included in that total number earlier, where I said there are 673 people running in 2022. So altogether, of those who are running on November 8th, today on the ballot, or at least expected to be on the ballot, 657 people. Okay. I don't think that's too bad. Now, again, I don't have anything to compare the 657 to. So I'm going to have to try to figure out, how do I identify whether that's good or bad? Now, I might be able to go back and look up past historical data. I'm going to have to, get a hold of some people and see who has that information, so that I can say, okay, well, in 2022, we had this many people that were running for office. Of course, 2022 is a midterm year. So I want to compare that to another midterm year. I don't want to compare that to, say, 2020, which was an election year. So I want to compare it to 2018. So I'll try to do that and get that information. I don't know if I'll be able to. So what's in store coming up? Because now that, a good bulk of the candidates are going to be done today. Like, they're either going to be elected or they will not have been elected. So then what is in store for this show? Well, I'll continue to talk to candidates as I can. As I said, I know that we have 3 candidates that are running for office, and they will be on the ballot in March here in Jacksonville. I know that there are other cities that out there that have elections as well, that are not necessarily today or maybe even this year. So the question is, can I get a hold of them and can I get them on the show and we can talk about it? I also want to try to follow up with candidates and say, okay, tell me how you did. And, maybe I'll look back at some of the episodes and say, okay, well, you said you were going to do this. What happened? Right? Because we need to hold our candidates accountable. And I did that in the last episode where I had Tubb and I had Hector Roos on. Hector Roos was my first guest for Friendly Fire. And if you remember, I asked him about, how likely, he felt confident that he was going to be able to raise $150,000 in order to qualify for matching funds from the state of Florida. And then he did not do that. So I asked him, I was like, hey, what happened? Why not? Right. So these are the kind of questions that I want to try to get candidates on and ask them in the future. If there's an opportunity to maybe host a debate. I came very close to hosting one for this election. Unfortunately, things just didn't play out in the way that I needed them to. So I was unable, but I will continue to talk about candidates. I will also shift when I don't have a candidate to talk about. Well, we're going to start talking about doing more bill reviews. And I will try to make those not as so bloody boring as maybe throwing a bunch of numbers at you on November 8th at 8 o'clock in the morning. But we'll see how that goes. But I'll continue my bill reviews where I simply take a bill, take a look at it, read it, and then give an opinion on it. And I'll also start looking at how some people are voting. So I may even spread out while I will only interview Libertarian candidates. I don't think it's a problem to go ahead and hold all of our elected officials accountable. And so if there is a bill that's popular, and I may go back and look and say, all right, how did you vote? How did you say you were going to vote? Or what impression did you give the voters when you were elected? Because we still need to hold our representatives accountable, even if they're not Libertarian Party members, because they are still passing laws and making legislation and so on and so forth. So we need to hold them accountable. So today, what is going to happen today? Today, I'm going to, I gave you this, this morning show where I'm simply just talking about some of the candidates and the delegates and the ratios and, where we are and kind of giving some information there. Throughout the day, I'm going to be keeping up with some of the elections, the elections, but I'll be keeping up with some in specific that I'm very curious about. Up in Georgia, we've got Shane Hazel, and we've got who's running for governor. We've got Lieutenant Governor, who is Ryan Graham running for Lieutenant Governor, and then Chase Oliver running for running for Congress as a Senate candidate. So I'm very curious to see how well those guys do. I'm definitely going to be very curious. The Arkansas crowd, they have a huge slate of people that are running, like 64 candidates. Is that Arkansas? No, yeah, I think it is Arkansas. Let me take a look here. Yes, they have 55 candidates, but that's not who I was thinking of, is it? I was thinking of Alabama. That's who I was thinking of, but Arkansas as well. So Alabama has, they popped up out of nowhere. They initially threw me for a loop because they had 64 candidates. And I think it's actually 65 now, but they had 65 candidates running, and they only had 13 delegates. And that just kind of came out of nowhere. I interviewed several of them. So I will definitely be trying to keep up with what's going on over in Alabama and how many of those candidates get elected. I'm going to try to keep up with everybody as best as possible. We will see. So I'll probably check back in probably about, 5, 6 o'clock, somewhere like that. I'll check in for a little bit. I may somewhere between 5 and 7. So kind of expect that somewhere between 5 and 7. I'm going to check in. I don't think there's enough information and that I have available and enough going on within the Libertarian Party to really talk throughout the day. So I'm withholding this idea of doing a day-long podcast because I just don't think that there's that much to talk about. And then also save my voice, a little self-incentive there. So I'll check back in somewhere between 5 and 7. And then I want to point out that the Libertarian Party, the National Party, they're going to be doing a live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern time. So let me pull that graphic up on the screen here. So at 9 p.m., our national chair, Angela McArdle, and Lainey Houston, I think it's Houston, and I'm not familiar with who that particular person is, but they will be doing an election day live stream. They're going to start that at 9 p.m. Eastern. And what they are going to do is basically watch the numbers come in and see who gets elected at that point. So I figure rather than try to compete with them, just let people know, hey, go check them out at 9 p.m. You should be able to find it on, any one of their social media accounts. So you can go to their YouTube page. That's probably the best page, best place to find that stream. But I imagine it'll probably be hopefully be streaming to Twitter and then also their Facebook page. So check there. They should at least have a link, if nothing else, or find them on YouTube and check them out. But that's going to be at 9 p.m. I'll try to put something out here in a little bit that's a little bit more clear on when. I'm thinking that I'm probably going to go about 7 p.m. and just kind of give, some thoughts and kind of rundown of what I saw happen throughout the day. And then just kind of see where, if we can make any estimations on any Libertarian candidates that might have actually won, or at least get an idea of where they placed. But that's what I have for the show. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a lot of information out of this show. And, definitely let me know, say, DL, that was too boring. There's too much information or what have you. But again, this is a little bit out of the ordinary. So because I'm not always going to be talking about the numbers of candidates and the number of delegates, but now we have this information. Now you are armed to go out there and have this discussion with your friends and family. And you can tell them, look, 241 candidates or 241 libertarians were elected were sitting in office in Q2 of 2021. I'll try to get better numbers on that. And you can say, look, we had well over 600 people running for office in 2022. So, let people know what these numbers are, because I think that once people start realizing that there are quite a few candidates that are running, then it becomes easier to support the party. And of course, the party, the reason that you want to support the party is because we simply have the best platform and the best values. So having said all that, let me see. Thanks everybody that joined in. We had Stephen Kuhn that said good job, dropped in and said good morning. That Libertarian lady dropping in here. And let's see here. What do we got here? Question. I can't wait to throw stats at people. Will you be doing a reaction video tomorrow? I don't know if I'll be. You know what? Tomorrow is Wednesday, so I should have a show. Yes, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, having a show. I got a little bit of I kind of got out of the swing of things last week, so I apologize for that. The reason I got out of the swing of things a little bit is just some challenges getting some people, one or two people that I wanted on, and then also, work stuff and vacation and, stuff that doesn't really matter. I mean, the show is important. That's what I really need to keep in mind, this show. But at any rate, so I hope you enjoyed the show today. Definitely tune in tomorrow. I'll have, my reaction to things tomorrow. Maybe even talk about, how things landed with the Arizona Senate. If you remember that was where Mark Victor, the Libertarian candidate, dropped out about a week ago, put his name behind Blake Masters, the Republican candidate for Senate, created a huge whirlwind of argument and debate in the Libertarian community. So I'll probably talk about, how those cards actually landed. The last I saw, it looked like Blake Masters was trailing behind Mark Kelly, the Democrat incumbent. So we'll see, of course, those are polls. So we don't know how the polls will actually turn out, whether they will reflect the results of the election, but we'll check that out. But I'll talk about that tomorrow. I'll talk about, what I saw from other, again, states like Alabama and Arkansas. We'll check out and see how they did with their huge numbers of candidates. But other than that, that's all I've got. So you can find other episodes at libertydad.com, archived video episodes at youtube.libertydad.com. You can also connect with me at libertydad, all one word, on Facebook, libertydadpod on Twitter, or email libertydadpodcast@gmail.com, because I would love to hear from you. And remember, if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. Have a great week. Catch you next time, and I'm out.